and welcome to Unlearned, which is Us Malcolm and Self-Learning Cafe's latest podcast series, where we'll be having conversations around education, mental health, wealth, technology, and many other such topics, and unlearning the way we think about them. Each week, we'll be having a couple of different guest speakers who will be sharing their unlearning journeys with us and helping us to see things in a different light. With us on this week's episode is Siddharth Sthalekar. Sid is a graduate of the Indian Institute of Management, which is a very, very prestigious institute, a business school here in India. And he was the head of South Asia's largest trading floor until 2011. Then he spent 4 years in the Gandhi Ashram, where he explored and experimented with multidimensional wealth systems. And then he went on to found Sacred Capital to shift us towards what he calls reputation-based economies. He believes the organizing principle for distributed networks is neighborhoods more than apps and businesses, and he's actually working on a wonderful project that he'll be sharing with us as well. Over the past 8 years, Siddharth has spoken at hundreds of public forums, from weekly features on television channels to academic institutions like MIT, platforms for ideas like TEDx, and so much more. His story has been featured in publications like Forbes Asia, GQ, and many more. Sid is living in Singapore right now with his partner Gemma and their beautiful and very adorable daughter Ida. Hi, Sid. So great to have you. Yeah, I think everyone wants to know, how one goes from managing trading floors to multiple forms of wealth and, working on what you're working on now.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that kind introduction as well. I think you could. I guess there's various ways to describe what we do or justify in our heads why we do what we do. And at this point of time,
Mm.
it feels like our generation at this point of time is witnessing this transformation from industrial revolution to informational eras. Because I don't even see
Mhm.
this like an informational revolution. I think we just entered a whole new era. And what has been fascinating for me through all of this is how we could update our economic systems to truly represent where we're going as society. And
Mm.
I think a lot of the economic systems that we rely on were designed a couple hundred years ago, maybe 100 years ago, maybe 70 years ago, and haven't been updated since, because they're still pretty much, the steam engine locomotive designs that we're relying on for very different kinds of societies today.
Right.
And you could say I'm interested in what updating that plumbing system for our house might look like. And I
Mm.
think it's not just an interesting and fascinating conversation. I think it's also messy, because changing the plumbing of a house is never easy. Because more than
Yeah.
just an intellectual thing of this is what the plumbing system should be, it's the mess of uprooting your home and the upheaval involved in actually digging into a system that your life depends on. And so it's almost like learning how to fly the plane or designing the plane while flying it, and that's never easy or safe. But it is interesting. I will say that.
Right.
um, yeah, so you could say like that is one of the motivating factors, or what guides me as I navigate through some of these things. Yeah, yeah. um, and so in a sense it's
Yeah.
like a socio-cultural political effort.
Hmm. Yeah, and we'll definitely talk more about what you're doing at Sacred Capital as well. Um, I also just wanted to start off the conversation with a bit of context as well. So we'll be, there's a lot of jargons, so to speak, that we'll be talking about, sharing economy and multiple forms of wealth. So I also just, if you could also explain to our listeners what exactly do we mean when we're saying, when we're talking about the sharing economy, or, when we're talking about multidimensional wealth systems, and why do you think they're very important, especially today in the world that we're living in?
Hmm. Hmm. It's a good question.
Mhm, mhm.
I don't use the word
Right.
sharing economy much because I feel like it's been
Mhm,
appropriated by Silicon Valley to mean different things. And so we now tend to assume, Uber or Airbnb are a representative of the sharing economy, but honestly, they're just um,
right.
ways to discover and transact within the existing economy. And and so I think some of the underlying economic shifts we're talking about are
Mhm,
related to some of the newer technologies
mhm.
that have, come over the horizon over the last few years. So blockchain
Right.
technology, I think, is now, pretty well known. Um,
Mhm.
but I think the larger
Right.
subset, which is distributed ledger technology, is fascinating to me. um, and blockchain tech kind of became
Mhm,
that, that first symbol of what distributed ledger technology can do. I think blockchain technology, as we all discovered, is pretty rudimentary
mhm.
and has troubles scaling beyond a point. And that's because it was designed for a very specific purpose. But distributed ledger tech, I think, is fascinating because it's introducing us to this new paradigm of
Right.
maintaining ledgers in a distributed way, as the name suggests. And
Mhm,
often when I talk about
mhm,
ledgers, like, I can see people tuning out because it is pretty boring.
mhm.
The thought of maintaining ledgers seems very closely related to accounting. And in a way, it is. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Um, but it presents radical new
Mhm,
opportunities for us as a generation, as a society, because up until now we've relied on specific systems to maintain ledgers for us, and for more material monetary bits of information we relied on banks or governments. So government maintains our
mhm.
birth records or land records, banks maintain our monetary records, because the understanding is that, Maitreyee maintaining it
Right.
herself, or Maitreyee's community maintaining herself, is not safe enough. Like, her hard drive might get erased, she might tamper that data. And
Mhm.
so we defaulted to centralized authorities maintaining that information for us. And more recently, we've defaulted to that
Right.
model with technology where, Facebook maintains our photographs and our comments for
Yeah.
us because we like to change our
Mhm,
devices every couple of years, or who knows if our devices break down.
mhm.
And so there is this surrendering of our agency of sorts in in,
Right.
towards someone we think can maintain this information for us.
Mhm,
um, and that can be a good, I mean, I'm not arguing that it's a bad idea always. I think it's played, had tremendous benefits for us over the years, but there's limitations to it. Because one, when someone centralizes maintaining that information,
mhm.
they define what can and cannot be maintained. So if you and me, Maitri, decide, this bit of information is important to us, like, let's say right now it is important for us to measure whether Sid comes to work on time every day. Or let's say, it is important for me to measure if Sid's memes that he posts every day are funny or not.
Right.
Like, maybe that's not important to the government of India, and so it won't be recorded. And so we don't have agency over what we can record. um, and secondly, when we do it in a centralized way, it usually ends up being expensive. because there's resources that go into maintaining something as simple as a land record, because it's not the actual, just the piece of paper that it's recorded on, but the entire infrastructure required for
Yeah.
government to maintain that information for us, which is pretty expensive when you think about it. Just the costs of running an institution, maintaining the institution, maintaining law and order, all of that stacks up. And so for these two reasons, we've had a very narrow
Mm,
definition of what we can maintain in a transparent, non-tamperable way. Um, and so I think distributed ledgers, and I won't get into the technical aspects of it, distributed ledgers throw up amazing new opportunities for us, because now we can potentially record
mm,
various bits of information. And by that I mean a broad spectrum. So not just Sid gave Maitreyee 3 pieces of gold, but it could also be Sid liked
right.
Maitreyee's blog post because he thought it was a pretty good blog post, and that bit of
Mm,
information, like Sid liked or clapped 50 times on Maitreyee's blog post, may have no monetary value, right? Like, who knows? Is there a monetary value to it? I don't know. And
mm,
so, if you ask me if I should
right.
spend $10 to save that bit of information, more likely than not, I'll say no. But with distributed ledgers, like I said, the
Mm,
costs, like things start tilting on, switching around, and all of a sudden we can start recording these bits of information. Um, and by we, I mean a group of people that come together. It might be a group of 25 friends, it might be a group of 50,000 people, it might be a group of 5 million people on the internet, can create these
mm,
agreements among themselves as to what needs to be measured, and how they'll measure, and and therefore what are the repercussions of measuring it, because the costs of maintaining this information are pretty low. So it presents new opportunities to networks of people that did not exist before. um, and that, to me, is fascinating,
mm,
because wealth is a construct. I mean, all money is in that sense a social construct, because since 1971,
right.
money as we know it hasn't actually been backed by any tangible resource. It is backed by fiat, which is
Yeah.
countries declaring that money is so, and so it is so. Like, that's basically um and so money really
Yeah.
is that construct which allows us to orchestrate ourselves better, because we would like to know who is creating value in society, and therefore money
Mm,
became that interesting new instrument with which we tracked who's what kind of behaviors would we like. And I'm not saying it in a dystopian way. I think it had genuine benefits and continues to do so. And so, with these new technologies, we have the opportunity to
mm,
not only design our new systems for wealth, like maybe for our group of 5,000 people on the internet,
right.
we would like to amplify certain behaviors or reward certain positive feedback loops. We could actually use wealth systems to affect that.
Mm,
And that doesn't mean everyone needs to get paid and everything has to have monetary value. You can actually, when I say multidimensional, it
right.
means there's might be monetary value, there might be
Mm,
reputational value, um, and they can intersect and play with each other. And that's what I mean by a multi-dimensional wealth system. So, in effect, distributed ledgers are actually, to me, exciting, because not only are they making money more efficient, and not only are they allowing anyone to start issuing money, and that's really common in some of the cryptocurrency circles. But I think the larger shift here is, oh wow, instead of money
right.
just being this one-dimensional thing, it can now be this multi-dimensional thing, which is pretty cool. Because I think what's beautiful about wealth is its ability, its formality. Like, I think, especially in societies like South Asia, in the past, we've used socio-cultural
Mm,
systems which are non-monetary to reward certain behaviors. Like, I think we're all familiar about, with this, particularly in South Asia, because you have uh, systems which aren't the best, but have served their purpose in the past, which is, amplifying good behaviors within society, norms, which, and therefore that indicates who
Right.
can
Yeah.
be, lent to, who can be trusted, and so
Mm.
on. And those systems never had a sense of formality about them, and which is why you know, they often
Right.
spiral down into, tribalism or patriarchy. um, and so I
Mm.
think distributed ledgers are allowing us to formalize some of those systems, and therefore address um, some of the problems that plagued these informal systems of the past. And that's not to say, I'm not suggesting I'm going to create this one app
Yeah.
that will track everyone's behavior in the world. Like, I think that's far from it. I think distributed ledgers actually
Mm.
allow a way more agent centric way of doing things, which is highly contextual, relative, human centric ledgers, which can help us in better sense making. And that's, I
Yeah.
think, an interesting possibility that exists ahead of us in the years to
Yeah,
come.
it sounds
um,
very,
I will
very
leave it at that.
fascinating. And it sort of brings me to my next question. I think a lot of what we're talking about with, multidimensional wealth and reputation based, you can also see that happening sort of today with how social media is, and, um, the advent of cancel culture as well. And yeah, I think that was just because even with all of the good social media has done, which is, it gives a voice to everyone who might not have had one before, and it gives you this, platform. There's like a lot of negative consequences of the same as well. And I think one of them, if you watch this documentary on Netflix called The Social Dilemma, it talks about how polarizing it's actually made, where we're either on one end of the extreme or another end of the extreme. And a lot of these opinions that we're forming, and a lot of our personal culture that we're forming, we're actually not very informed about it. It's a very unconscious thing that's sort of happening. So I also wanted to talk about this, like, in this age where there's so much information that's available and so many opinions and so much noise, how does one sort of, protect what we'd call our cultural sovereignty? And, like, how do you think maybe technology can change, or how do you think, technology can play a part in that?
That is a pretty big question, and I think it's been discussed to death. and
Yeah.
and which is why I think the best thing for me to do is to
Uh-huh.
not provide, like, here's why. Like, I think honestly there's probably like 50 different
Mm.
lenses with which you can look at the situation we find ourselves in. So at this point of time, it probably makes sense for me
Right.
to look at it from my specific lens, which is, I tend to look at things from an economic lens,
Mm.
or the way economic systems are defined, and
Right.
as a result of those, technology that is spawned off from these systems. Like, that's how I look at them. And when I look at it from that lens, or as I've seen technology emerge over the last few years, or the way it's evolved over the last few years, I'm kind of
Mm.
shocked that people are surprised. Like, I couldn't get past,
Mm.
I don't know, 15 minutes of social dilemma, because I was surprised that people were surprised. Um, because isn't
Mm.
this the monetary economy doing exactly what it's meant to do? Like, what did you think was going on? Like, that was my, and I don't mean to say it from a very sassy, like, making fun of people, but I just like, I couldn't watch any more of it
Mm.
because I was annoyed with how surprised people were. And so I brought that up because I
Mm.
think the state of our technology today is the result of leveraging our economic system to the max, like pushing it to the brink. Like, I think it is
Mm.
the economic system working at its efficient best, which is its ability to seep through cracks in society, find us, and constantly extract from us. um, and we know that is the economic system. Like, what's surprising?
Right.
And so in my head, it is, you see some of the results of like polarization, etc., because fundamentally it's, it's a used car salesman
Mm.
constantly selling you things, and the used car salesman doesn't have the state of
Right.
consciousness to understand what lines it shouldn't cross. It's just constantly selling you things. And so if you constantly want dog videos, you will constantly
Yeah.
get puppy videos. If you constantly want violence, violent videos, you will constantly get it. And so it's almost like saying, I'm mad that the bartender sold us drinks. And like the bartender's job is to sell you drinks. And I think our failure, or what I would like to address, is collectively our economic
Mm.
system hasn't evolved those dimensions to think
Mm.
beyond just this constant extractive way. And so I think technology evolved as a result, in in Silicon Valley, as a result of that economic system. And so I don't think, for example, Zuckerberg is a genius. I think
Right.
he is just the kind of person that gets amplified through the monetary system. And so every time I think about it,
Mm.
I try to not be resentful about Zuckerberg, but instead be resentful towards our lack of, the fact that we've not changed our plumbing. I like to use that analogy. Like, if you have
Ah.
shitty plumbing, you'll get shitty shitty shower. Like, that's what, that's um and so that's how I frame it in my head. um and so I think,
Mm.
some of the revolutions in technology that I've talked about, like distributed ledger tech, is allowing us to birth new designs for technology, which I think are radically different. Because
Right.
some of these neo projects,
Mm.
I've spoken about some of these in other conversations about holochain, for example, are giving birth to what we call agent centric
Right.
technology. So if you think of Facebook as data centric technology, because it
Mm.
exists to collect your data and monetize it to create shareholder value, um, Holochain or distributed ledger flips that on its head
Right.
and say, hey, you fundamentally have agency over your information. And so the role of apps
Mm.
isn't to store your information in silos. It might be something else, like some kind of socio-cultural coordination that they might be doing for us. And so I, some
Mm.
of the technological problems what we've spoken about aren't going to be solved by saying, hey bartender, we expect more from you. I don't think we should. I think it is our collective failure to
Yeah.
not change the plumbing. And so um,
Mm.
some of these new technologies give me hope, because like I said, they flip things on the head. We can actually start designing technology that's not necessarily data centric, silo centric, and that starts presenting new opportunities to us. Um, and I think some of these new
Mm.
opportunities for us are rooted in giving back our cultural sovereignty. And that's something that has been very interesting to me,
Mm.
because I think the way technology has been architected, um, there is a buy in that is required for just simple access to tools. Something as simple as, I want to share my picture and
Mm.
share a few comments on it. It's not just a simple tool that I go to and I can hear from my friends. I actually have to stay locked into such an environment, and as a result of it, the culture of that application, let's say Facebook in this case, is imposed on me and onto my social relationships.
Mm.
And I think that is very
Right.
interesting, because I think it's a massive, massive thing. Like in the past,
Mm.
when you went to buy a packet of Parle G biscuits from your neighborhood vendor, you didn't have this bag full, like that vendor,
Mm.
that grocer, that vania, as you call it in some parts of India, didn't have complete control over who you could eat those biscuits with, or what you dip those biscuits in. Right. And so I think that is
Mm.
very interesting. And I think it exposes some of the flaws in our monetary economy in a very, very deep way. And I almost equate it to the rise of neoliberalism. And I don't know how old you are, Maitri, but a big chunk of my
Right.
conditioning, my formative years, I was in my teen years were in the 90s, and so I kind of saw that
Mm,
phase when neoliberalism
right.
entered India, and there was this very interesting invitation to India to join the
Yeah.
global economy, but at the same time there was this trade-off where we actually had to
Yeah.
surrender our Indian identity, almost mute it in a way, in a very subtle way, um, in order to
Mm,
participate
mm,
in this global
mm.
economy of trade. Because um, and in a sense,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's a buy-in that all of us as Indians have to do is, oh, if you want to be successful in the corporate world, you have to mute certain parts of your cultural identities. And so it's almost like this flattening of our cultural identities of
Yeah.
sorts.
Yeah.
And I think a big chunk of global commerce
Mm,
was shaped with that ethos. And so to me, Facebook is the absolute peak of that
yeah.
ethos, which is one world, you can talk to anyone from anywhere,
Mm,
but you have to buy into this uniform monolithic culture that rules the world. And we
yeah.
didn't we don't know better, we
Mm,
didn't know better, and so we said, yeah, okay, it's just culture, like we're willing to sacrifice some of those things. And so I think some of the bigger scars that technology has left with us is this muting or flattening of our cultural identities in the interest of being able to access simple tools.
yeah.
Like when you think about it, what is the actual worth of
Mm,
Facebook's code? It's not that much. And, but the fact that it can actually leverage that
yeah.
code and orchestrate society in such a way is very fascinating. And I think that's where some of the damage is done. So
Mm,
agent-centric technology, in my lens, like is has the opportunity to attack the roots of some of these problems, which basically means you start seeing technology
mm,
being built that is very generic. And so we can actually layer our specific culture and our specific
right.
needs to do what we wish with these generic tools. And so, as weird as this sounds,
Right.
maybe these technological tools can actually serve us for a change. Like, how weird that would that be? Right? So I think
Right.
it's sad that we think that's cool. But I think fundamentally that is what we all yearn for, because that is, the last 20 or 30 years, like that is what has been taken away from us. That ability to
Mm,
express, emote, connect, and engage with each other without some company in some part of the world enforcing their own agenda on us. And so that's kind of what I mean by cultural sovereignty.
yeah.
And I think it has to be held with a certain amount of delicateness, because we all
Mm,
understand why we did this. Like, I grew up, when I was 11, I witnessed the Mumbai riots. And it
mm,
wasn't pretty watching people burn each other alive. And it almost feels like that was one of those moments which
yeah.
spurred us away from like these very tribal tendencies towards globalization. But I think we're now realizing that
Mm,
pendulum has swung too far.
right.
And the question is, how do we re-engage with our
Yeah.
cultural identities without spiraling down into a tribe of monkeys? And I think some of what you're seeing in the world, like some
Yeah.
of the supremacist movements, or you could say, some of the reclaiming of culture that you're seeing around the world, I think relates perhaps to
Yeah.
some of this. And so, yeah, I think there's a very interesting shift that we could be seeing in the way society relates with technology. Um, and like most pivotal points,
Yeah.
I think these little portals of opportunity will open up. And I think there's a portal right now through which we could rush through, which could take us into that promised land of engaging with
Mm,
our cultural identity while simultaneously being global. And I think is that is an interesting quest for me. That's what I'm motivated by of late. Um, But yeah,
Yeah.
therefore I think about technology in that socio cultural way, because I don't think they can be separated. um, and I think
Mhm.
it is critical that we don't separate them. But yeah, that's all.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree. I think, like you said, I think in the quest for maybe being accepted and being liberal, I think we've sacrificed also a lot of our own values that we've grown up with. I know I see it happening with me.
Hmm.
I think I've been questioning that a lot as well
Hmm.
lately, how how liberal do I really want to be?
Hmm.
And how much of this do I
Hmm.
really agree with? But yeah, I think there's at least some hope for the future,
Hmm.
especially with things that you're working on at Sacred Capital as well, which also leads me to, you were talking about, I think when we talked about doing this podcast together, you were also talking about a
Hmm.
project that you were working on, um, and I also like for you, like I'd love for you to share more about that as
Yeah,
well.
I'm happy I think so. Some people are familiar with Sacred Capital, and that's been, a project I've been associated with for a few years now. And
Mm,
from very early on, the aspiration was always building economic systems that, like I said, are more representative of informational eras.
mm,
um, and because of distributed ledgers, I think it's allowing us to change that definition of wealth, and which is why very early on we figured reputational currencies are going to play a very important role in this. So I should clarify what I mean by reputational currencies.
right.
I don't mean like your credit
Mhm.
score. Like, not all reputational currencies have a monetary equivalent. Um, Something as simple as a
Mm,
like or a clap can be a reputational currency because it says something about you in a
mm,
particular context. um, or timestamps, or the fact that you contributed 15 human hours every Saturday volunteering at an organic farm. I think all of those things say something about you. And so it's very interesting because reputation currencies can have a monetary value, and that monetary value is associated with the context. So maybe in some
mm,
contexts punctuality is has a monetary value, in some it doesn't. And so I think that it depends on what someone wants to do with it. um, Reputation currencies aren't tradable. Like,
right.
if I've contributed like 15 hours somewhere and it says something about me, I can't sell it to you, and for that to now, for people to now associate that with you. Like, I don't think, again, it
Mm,
works that way. um, and reputation currencies, are
right.
contextual. So punctuality may mean something in one context, it may mean something else, totally else, something else in another context. Like, with the same timestamps, people in India might consider me punctual. People in Singapore might say, no, you're not punctual, you were 30 seconds late every day. And so sense making with reputation currency should always be done locally. Like, we're not talking about like a universal church like system, which is,
Mhm.
Maitreyee is a punctual person and everyone must know. We're not talking about, like, I think it's held very lightly and very contextually. Um, and lastly, like, reputation
Mm,
has a non-material quality to it, which is why I think it maps very well to informational
mm,
eras, because you and I could be in one community,
mm,
and the fact that you write these blogs or create these funny memes in this context could actually make sense to people in thousands of other contexts. Like, you're not actually physically going and contributing to all of them, but the
right.
fact that this community here thinks you're funny
Mm,
means, like, in a very related contextual way, there could all be these allied communities that also think you're funny. And so it has crazy non-material values to it, which
mm,
money doesn't. Like, money is very limited by materiality, which is why I think it maps very well with industrial revolution stuff. But the
right.
moment you go into informational era, like
Mm,
especially data or information is non-material. And so as our economy,
mm,
as our footprint of
yeah.
how much of our life is informational versus industrial starts moving more towards informational, I think our balance will start shifting
Mhm.
more towards reputational economies. And so I think this is like one of those evolutionary moments,
Right.
where, like the first fish took that step out of water or
Mhm.
whatever, if I were to romanticize what we're seeing. And so I think that's kind
Yeah.
of what I think where we're headed. And so Sacred Capital has spent a lot of time building reputation
Mhm.
infrastructure. And so one of our main products as such is,
Mhm.
is known as a reputation vault. And the reputation vault basically
Mhm.
allows any group of people, however small, they might be 5 people, they might be 5 million, it doesn't matter, any small group of people or large group of people, to articulate their culture locally and easily. Which means if you're a group of bloggers or memers,
Mhm.
it becomes it we make it the reputation wall makes it really easy for you to say, hey, the order of our feed shouldn't be controlled by Zuckerberg, but this simple formula should be what controls our feed. Like maybe we define it by the number of likes that people get, or the number of people who gave you
Yeah.
stars, in the way you were hosted, and
Mhm.
or like you decide your sense making is localized. And so the reputation vault allows you to do it very easily, and that one of
Mhm.
the what we're creating is known as a reputation language, which makes that super simple. And for that to be registered in distributed ledgers like holochain, and that's super critical, because then this group of 5 million
Right.
people can actually interact with each other, because wow, like this information is coded into distributed ledgers and we can actually trust each other. Um, we don't we you know we don't have to trust Maitreyee with a central server, and she kind of can tamper with the data whenever she wants. So it allows for this kind of socio-cultural coordination. But there's a twist.
Right.
Because of the way we've designed the reputation vault, we allow for coherence across membranes, which basically means if we're a
Mhm.
community of memers and Maitri is the funniest among us, and let's say Archana is another community who really likes a sense of humor, Maitri can enter Archana's community, and from day one, she would be regarded as funny there as well, because Archana can cohere or can understand or infer from our reputational
Mhm.
currencies. So, by creating these standards, like a
Wow.
like created in one community can
Mhm.
be cohered in another community. And I think that is wild, because it unlocks whole new ways for sociocultural coordination and creates what we call mimetic bridges.
Yeah.
Because, oh, like before this,
Mhm.
my contributions to a group were good, but then they were only valid if that group was big. But now I could be contributing to a group of 10, but if that group is
Mhm.
validated by 50,000 others, my contributions in this local space ripple out to all corners of the world. And and in that, I think, is the seed for
Wow.
like new kinds of socio-cultural coordination. And so, which is why I think agent-centric
Mhm.
ledgers are unlocking this new way in which we can play with each other, which I think is another conversation. But it, like I say, it's a new form of coordination without consensus, without this need for like a United Nations governing us all, but instead like mediation
Right.
between groups of networks of people is now possible. Um, and so yeah, so I
Mhm.
think it starts addressing the need for AI. It's because instead of AI, we're relying on social intelligence, distributed social intelligence, to coordinate ourselves. And so in a
Mhm.
nutshell, that's what Sacred Capital does. This technology is used by neighborhoods, and so neighborhoods is the more public visible project, which is actually doing a public fundraise later this year. um, Neighborhoods allows any groups of people to leverage the reputation vault and articulate their culture, but it allows them to pop in or patch in generic tools so that they can play with each other and engage with each other. So you don't need to go to a Facebook to speak to each other. But because of holochain technology is starting to get really modular and widget like, you can actually plug in a chat widget, or
Mhm.
maybe a Facebook like widget or maybe a Reddit like widget. And so, 10,000 of us actually have our own neighborhood to engage with each other. We don't need to go to an app to do that. And so it creates this new possibility with
Right.
which we can play with each other, but in our own, with our own cultural sovereignty. And what's important is like our contributions to one neighborhood can be cohered across the world. And so, in instead of apps dictating how we discover each other and play with each other, we're saying neighborhoods might be a better way to do it, because these generic tools
Right.
aren't dictating how we discover each other. Like, we're doing it, our group of people is doing it. And so, which is why we say neighborhoods is specific culture generic tools, whereas apps are generic culture and specific tools. So we're kind of flipping that on its head. And so neighborhoods is, you could say, a project that we think is an attempt at a new way for new kind of sociocultural orchestration. And I think there will be like multiple attempts at new kinds of sociocultural orchestration. I think neighborhoods might just be one of them. Um,
Mm.
and which is why I think that might go a long way in addressing some of the problems that we spoke about, because the bartender isn't a multinational
Right.
corporation that's trying to sell you the most drinks. The bartender is now one of you. And so I think that one of
Mm.
you is more local
Right.
culturally, but also less vested in extracting from you. And so I think it creates those new
Mm.
possibilities where conversations can be had. But every time a conversation is being had, there's no bartender pouring fuel to the fire and inflaming and maximizing the most sensationalist
Mm.
conversations because eyeballs are needed. But instead,
Yeah.
the motivations are
Mm.
different. In fact, the motivations are more locally articulated. And so I think
Mm.
this allows us to experiment with reputational economies as well, because now all of a sudden, instead of just owning money from each neighborhood,
Mm.
oh, reputation currencies might be important, because if in this really well validated community I have 50,000 likes, I can go to 100,000 other communities and be validated. And maybe that is a form of wealth. Like, maybe it gives me access to credit, maybe it gives me access to projects, maybe it bumps me up in people's feeds.
Mm.
And so that's how reputational currencies start becoming, I think, a form of wealth. And therefore we start potentially seeing multidimensional wealth, which is when you look at your portfolio, you're not just going to say, oh, I have like so many $1 million, but you might be saying like, oh, in all of these neighborhoods I have all of these reputational currencies as well. And so therefore we say we've added a dimension to wealth.
Yeah.
But that's how it all links to, I guess, what we
Mm.
were talking about earlier. um,
Yeah. I
yeah,
think,
that is,
yeah, it all sounds very
yeah, I guess the
fascinating.
challenge is like, how do we ground this, right? And so I think Sacred Capital like has been designing this technology,
Mm.
and neighborhoods becomes like a good attempt at grounding it. And it's, in that sense, time
Yeah.
for that rubber to hit the road. um and yeah,
Mm.
and let's see, I think the next few months, next year or so, is going to be about rolling the stuff out and seeing how it lands with a few people. I think one of the, yeah, there's a lot of scarring that we have to, that we all collectively have to deal with, because I think our relationship with technology is so deeply scarred that
Yeah.
people hold this very inherent skepticism towards
Mm.
technology. And maybe, hopefully, we'll be able to
Yeah.
overcome some of this. um, let's see.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Fingers
fingers
crossed.
crossed.
So I also had a few surprise rapid fire
Sure.
questions for you.
I'm just by now, like, I don't give
So
short
yeah,
answers, so I don't
yeah,
know how, I don't know what you'll do if my rapid
yeah.
fire is like 5 minutes long, but let's see. Yeah.
It's fine. um, the idea is to not think too much and just sort of say
That,
what comes
yeah.
to mind,
I
even if
promise
it's
I will
5
try.
minutes
Yeah.
long. You're good. Yeah. So the first question I have for you is, what is the most important thing you have unlearned
In
so
my
far?
life, like all,
In your life,
oof,
work?
that my definition of what is fair may not be the right definition. That life is too fundamentally chaotic for me to think like, oh,
Mm,
like if I'm just right and I think I do what is fair, then like I think life is way more chaotic and non-linear than I can imagine. So that means, yeah, blame myself less
very.
and take less credit, I guess.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Aptly put. Okay. If you could go back and change one thing about your
Ooh,
education, what would it be?
I guess take myself less seriously. I took my education very seriously. Yeah. Or like I was very motivated to do well in the education system. And I'm not saying that was
Mm,
bad. I'm not saying it was bad that I did
yeah.
well. I'm just saying like I don't think like that would,
Mm,
yeah, I could have
mm.
spent my time, or I could have spent all that mental bandwidth with other things, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's the case with a lot of us, especially
Yeah.
in Indians. Yeah. So my next question is sort of a bit in the same vein. So now
Hmm.
you have a child, and when you think about her education, what is the one thing that you think should be present in her education? I mean,
She is,
she's too young
well,
right
I
now.
hope, I don't know, I hope she's not watching 20 years from now and gonna hold me to task for this. Um but I have chats with my wife about this. I think it is very interesting. I think the world she will be born into will be fundamentally chaotic, and so in some way allowing her to roll with the chaos, and kind of as she wades
Mhm,
in the chaos, like to become friends or comfortable with it, because I think that's something me personally, like I still struggle with.
mhm,
um I think the world that she enters will be less like uniform and much more like fractured, sometimes in a negative way but sometimes in a good way, because it's also when culture is forming, like that's I think part of it. And so I actually think something she will have to learn is, like I call it mimetic bridging, or bridging across cultures, identities, languages,
mhm,
ways of being. I
mhm.
think it's something Indians fundamentally learn because India is so culturally diverse in a very genuine way. Like all of us speak
Yeah.
multiple languages. We,
Mhm,
different states in India are so radically different that when we do enter these new cultural spaces, we immediately, try and get a sense of what their model system is, and how we engage. Like it requires a whole new way of engaging. Like it's more oriented in mediation rather than enforcement. And so I think for her, like mimetic bridging, which means like diving into different cultures and identities, might be through like learning a crazy number of
mhm.
languages. I think languages therefore might be more important than some of the stuff that we give importance to. um, so I think that's a skill that is increasingly important for future generations, in my opinion. Mm.
Hmm.
Very true. Which
Very
means I
true.
have
Yeah.
to get up to speed and
Okay.
start teaching her some of these languages that I know, and I've been really bad at it. But hopefully, I'll be better in the years to come.